Ugh, I'm sorry that video got cut off. That's so maddening. I don't want to make videos that are only like 5 or 6 minutes long. But anyway, what was I saying? This book's not in great shape. It's got an ugly stain on it. This came from a free box, and I couldn't believe it. I was like, what? Because I encountered the Seth followers IRL when I was at that little college in Arizona that I was talking about in the previous video. There was this 24-hour late night diner that was just there in Thatcher, which is a tiny little town of 2,000 people. And it attracted all the most interesting, strange, offbeat, unusual folks to that place late at night. I mean, that could have just been a movie or a reality show. Probably still could be around there. But a 24-hour diner in a tiny town with ranches around it, etc. There were 2 in that town. It's something else. The other one was like freaking Blue Velvet. It was like walking into a 1950s parlor. But at this one Jerry's, I met this group of kids. They were young adults, late teens, early 20s, that had like a pagan outpost out in the desert. And they were all followers of Seth, of this channeled spirit. One time I went over there and they had a giant pentagram made of salt on their wooden floor. And they said they were trying to do a ritual to cast out Oscar, the demon that lived in the shed behind their place and who was becoming unruly. They had all these books from Seth that had rainbow colored spines. They look pretty cool, actually. The whole set. If you go to like a new age bookstore, like here in town, they have one called Blue Moon. You can see those Seth books. But it sounds like some pretty far out wild stuff, man. This lady channels this cosmic personage, Seth, supposedly. Filled with constructive ideas, humor, and wit. The story of her astral travels is particularly striking. Your urge to read about Seth and not take him lightly. Well documented, believable, and convincing. Says the Franklin Banner Tribune. Well, that paper got weirder after this. Wonder if that's from Franklin, Tennessee. I've been there. Had toe surgery there. Mediumship is a fascinating and provocative subject. I remember being quite bored by those books that those pagans pushed on me. I'm like a pagan sympathizer. I don't really want to be part of any organization or label or anything. But I'm all about losing your ego in nature and going wild. This book is dedicated to Seth and to Rob, my husband. Seth material. Seth Speaks, The Education of Oversoul 7. It's kind of a beautiful artifact of a book. Sad about that stain, but how can you stay healthy? How can you get rid of any illnesses you might have? Exactly what is the connection between your state of mind and your health? Seth's ideas on this subject have been of great value to Rob and me and to everyone who has come in contact with them. Man, those desert cats were crazy. I used to go meditating with them out at these spires out in the desert. They were just rock towers, and everyone would sit on one tower apiece. They were like upturned hands that were huge out in the desert. And somebody would play a bongo drum, and someone else would chant Om. They were a wild bunch of folks. One of them kind of started stalking me, though. I had to cut ties with those freaks. He was just one of those weird people that was like looking for somebody to follow. And he latched onto me, and he started like appearing in my dorm room at like 6 a.m. Hey, what are we doing today? We are not doing too much. Go on, get. Not to say he's representative of a Seth follower or anything. Just that Graham County, Arizona has wild things out in those hills and hollers. And interesting people. I remember going once to a bonfire where they had giant pentagrams made out of gasoline burning. Torches everywhere. What is this place? Oh, I can't wait to talk about these Carlos Allende annotated books. Another stack of paperbacks. Oh, look, I've got another copy of The True Believer by Eric Hoffer. Canonical skeptical text I just looked at. This looks intriguing. Kind of reminds me of this book I've heard about called Stalking the Wild Pendulum. About just different ways of existing in reality. Pretty far out stuff. Like Freud filtered through psychedelics. Like thinking about the mind filtered through some wild planes of thought. I don't know. This book is beautiful. Look at this weird thing. Look at all these people around a pond, and then there's a giant cracking egg above them with a butterfly coming up. Just another day in the 70s, man. 1973. Intellectual voyage toward new ways of thinking, perceiving, learning. Oh, interesting. This is building on Castaneda. Got a Castaneda book in the paperback literary case. Maybe I should bring it over here. 2 copies of this book. One I'm noticing, though, is marked up, so I think that's going to go away. I don't remember getting this in a classroom or anything. It's all written up as if it was. I think this is from a free box. The inspirational bestseller that has led thousands to the fulfillment of their desires through the art of mental energy and affirmation. You know, there's something to visualizing your goals and going after them. I might actually read this. Oh, Charles Fort's so good for weird stuff. He was just like this collector of the arcane. You know, it was like, who knows? One of the greatest books ever written, says Tiffany Thayer. Book of the Damned. By the damned, I mean what science has excluded. He has a little note on the front cover in the title. That's amazing. Have I ever seen that in a book? He has his initials as part of it, Charles Fort. But he created the idea of Fortean phenomena, and just things that can't be easily explained. Look at this beautiful paperback. Look at this back cover. Oh my gosh. I love it. Black rains, ice falling from the sky, Chinese seals in Ireland, discoveries of weird and ancient artifacts, lost planets, triangular clouds, eerie lights in the heavens, and thousands of other even more amazing happenings. The Book of the Damned is full of marvelous data of the most mysterious and provoking character, all of which has been deliberately ignored by scientists. Theodore Dreiser. Whoa. This guy. Wrote Sister Carrie. Huh. Is science a sacred cow, or is it a not sacred, so sacred coward? Learn the answer in the astounding pages of the Book of the Damned. These really are fun to read, and they do get your mind going. Okay, I've featured this book before and talked about it before, but this book kind of shaped my life a little bit. Aliens Among Us by Ruth Montgomery. When I was in 5th grade, this book was sold in grocery stores around Bayfield, Colorado and Durango, Colorado. I remember seeing it, but it was sold all over America, and this sort of thing had a vogue. Anyway, there's a chapter in here on the mystic channeler Tuella. Here's a book that Tuella wrote, Project World Evacuation. But she had previously had my family's P.O. box in Bayfield, Colorado, and then she moved to Salt Lake City. There's a blog you can find online about that. But she was this known channeler, predicted to occur by the year 2000. Did that happen? I can't remember. Was there a massive catastrophe and then aliens rescued the survivors? It might have been off a little bit. Look how fascinating this is. Plus the up-to-date visions of our readers and the 3 days of darkness revealed, so they take biblical elements. This is the cultic milieu at work. Aliens Among Us, Ruth Montgomery lists Tuella's P.O. box as 2566 Durango, Colorado. So we would get Tuella's mail all the time. And my brother Rob, who was then an aspiring writer and now is a writer, would sometimes write back. And it was really funny. But I remember reading some weird letters that we got. People would be like, there was this demon in my room, but it was also the Virgin Mary, and they were like adding all these weird things that they were mixing together. There's some really strange stuff that's like half stayed with me over the years. Something about a plant being. Here's from Tuella's thinking too. She was part of the Arcturian contactee era. Have you ever heard of the Max Headroom hoax, where a television signal featuring the character Max Headroom was forced onto British TVs for a little while? That was an Arcturian thing. They were part of this movement. Anyway, I'll never forget reading this in 5th grade, a big hardcover version from the library. Prepare to meet our wondrous guides from beyond the earth. Long before Shirley MacLaine wrote about out-of-body experiences, Ruth Montgomery in her best-selling books revealed many spiritual wonders. I gotta have this now. It's like part of my life. This is kind of a official examination of the UFO phenomenon. It does have a lot of explanatory power. I remember reading this. Pairs well with Watch the Skies, which I think I got rid of some good old weird paperbacks. Oh, well. This is a beautiful looking book. What American general is convinced the UFOs are spaceships from another world? 1956. Yeah, I got rid of some great stuff. I had the first mention of the Roswell incident in a 1950s book. I gave that to Ty. I took a UFO class taught by the folklorist Bill DeWan, where we studied like the anthropology of UFO sightings and what it says about U.S. history and the Cold War and all this other stuff. It was fantastic. I think that's when I read this. Is Elvis alive? Well, I hope not anymore because, you know, he's a vampire or something. He would be quite old. Did Elvis Presley hoax his own death? This is the woman who broke the most shocking story of our time. You've seen her on Oprah, Larry King, David Letterman, USA Today, NBC. Now hear the incredible Elvis phone call. Now read the evidence and judge for yourself. Why has the death certificate disappeared? Why has no one ever come forward to claim on Elvis Presley's life insurance? I remember seeing a comment on some website from some Albuquerque news story that they saw Elvis after he supposedly died here in Albuquerque once. Haha. We get all those stories in New Mexico. This is also where Andy Kaufman has been sighted. The writer John LeMay and I were going to write a book together called Roswell, You Decide, and we were going to alternate chapters between a skeptic and a believer. And the project changed both of us. It made him more skeptical of it, so much so that he didn't feel like he could make the believer case. And it kind of chilled me out on the phenomenon in general and made me think there's actually some really interesting, wild stories that have no good explanations and that you got to wonder about a little bit. Like things, there were tons and tons of people saw something. Also, I've spent a lot of time out in the wilderness and the desert, and I have seen things over the years. Most of them seem government, but once in a while it's like, what was that? Had a couple of such sightings this summer. But back when we were working on that book, I read literally every book that had Roswell in the title, every book. And it's a fascinating story. I gave away like most of my best ones about it. Carl Flock. Here's a book about Atlantis, collecting that lore. Pretty interesting stuff. Now these two books are next to each other, but that's kind of cool. Man, those would be neat, like framed next to each other. Almost like meant to be there. Look at that. Berlitz is another one of those people like Charles Fort who really promoted interesting, strange stuff. The Bermuda Triangle, I read his book on that. This is a beautiful paperback. What an ephemeral artifact. I love the idea of a lost undersea place. But it's mostly of folkloric interest to me. If there was ever a historic Atlantis, it was probably just some town that got flooded. Some island. But the movies make me hope for more. And the stories are wild. One time I was camping in southern New Mexico with my kid, writing an article about geocaching for New Mexico Magazine. And this guy came out of nowhere and started talking about how these mountains held the entrance to the lost continent of Lemuria, and it was underground, and we could find it by going through the Oregon Mountains. So we should probably have followed that guy because he's like in some other realm now. But anyway, I wrote a paragraph about it in my article about geocaching, and the editors got it. Too weird. But it did happen. I also mentioned in the article that a creepy car idled by us for half the night, and even though we were out in the middle of nowhere, and they cut that too. New Mexico Magazine is owned by the Bureau of Tourism, so it's got to serve those ends. But I think it adds flavor. Lost Atlantis gathers the ancient legends and the views of scientists, occultists, scholars, and mystics into a truly modern reading. Last. Dang, these books are beautiful. Bermuda Triangle is a great topic. I once camped on a corner of the Bermuda Triangle off the coast of Miami. Well, the coast of Miami. We talked about it while we were camping there. This is a corner of the Bermuda Triangle. Though you could argue that that same corner is actually Norfolk, Virginia. When I read books on the Bermuda Triangle, they seem to dispute what the East Coast corner is. Is it Norfolk, Virginia? Is it Miami? This is an interesting book. I don't know why, but I read like 3 books on the Bermuda Triangle a couple of years ago. I was going to write something that it drew from. Oh, it's because when I wrote my script about walking across the country, I wrote about when we camped on that corner of it. And so I just wanted to kind of immerse myself in the topic for a minute so that I could make that scene as good as it could be while recreating it and talking about it. So I read this one, and weirdly, so it was when I was subbing around Albuquerque. A few months later, I noticed students here and there were talking about the Bermuda Triangle, and I wondered if I had advertised this by reading it in class or having it in my backpack pouch on the side. That's kind of fun. Hello. The book that started all that new triangle talk, The Sleeper that became a bestseller. This is also about the Bermuda Triangle. They tried to rechristen it the Devil's Triangle. I read that as well. I read 3 of them. Okay, now this book is beautiful. The flying saucers are real. Look at this thing. This is a gold medal book. This symbol represents the most exciting writing to be found anywhere. Gold medal book. Gold medal. This is an early UFO book about the phenomenon. In Farmington, New Mexico, more than 3,000 citizens observed the flying disc simultaneously. That's a crazy story in the 50s. Yeah, there's a restaurant in Farmington that has photos of it on the wall from the old original newspaper, and they're crazy. What? Explanation, page 62 and 63. What does that mean? Something. The 1950 paperback goes way back. It's fragile. Did I just hurt it? Donald Kehoe. I think he was involved with the military. I'm trying to remember who that is. The Blood Cults. This is a rather sensational book that has a chapter on the penitentes of New Mexico in it, and mentions Carl Taylor, the journalist whose murder I've written about extensively, who died in 1936. The Blood Cults. This is some sensational stuff. This is like the movie that the taxi driver goes to. The Penitent Brethren. I first heard about this ancient and mystical blood ritual some years ago when I met an American journalist, Carl Taylor, at a party in Manila. This could be true. Listen to those 2 podcast episodes about Carl Taylor if you're interested in that story at all. He was a journalist writing about the penitentes who was killed in 1936, shot in his house. It was his 15-year-old neighbor, but his 15-year-old neighbor was a penitente. And the Hermano Mayor, the leader of the penitentes, was the first on the crime scene. Interesting. Movie about it in the 1930s, 1937, The Lash of the Penitentes. You can see the trailer on YouTube and the movie itself, but the movie's been heavily censored in modern times. The trailer has a lot of the toplessness that got the movie banned. None of that's in the movie anymore. Clyde Tingley, the New Mexico governor, banned it for being sensational. They add all sorts of stuff and make it an exploitation film. Here's another Kevin Randall book about the UFO crash. He's the #1 scholar of Roswell, and it's really interesting when you read lots of books about Roswell because a lot of them involve people walking back what the truth. And Kevin Randall, it's sad, he kind of gets dispirited as they go on, like, all these great things we thought were real weren't. I think he remains a believer, but Carl Flock was someone who he started out writing pro Roswell incident stuff. This is definitely real. This definitely happened. And then ultimately wrote the book Roswell Inconvenient Facts and the Will to Believe, where he kind of made the case conclusively, like this was definitely an aluminum coated rubber balloon train from Alamogordo. And here's the maps of the wind patterns from the day it got loose. And here's how it got to Mac Brazel's ranch in Corona and scraped along the ground. And here's this and here's that, and here's where the different elements of the story came in at different times. Like Roswell just like happened supposedly in 1947. They were doing things like spying on the Soviets using high altitude jet streams and high altitude microphones. And so there was a cover up after that balloon train crashed on Brazel's ranch. It was a cover up of the spying on the Soviets. And it did look fishy, and it went away for a long time until 1979 or so when Stanton Friedman, the UFO researcher, resurrected the story. It had been mentioned in one book in the 50s before that, and really had not had much of a life as a story. But then once Stanton Friedman started talking about it and books started coming out about it in the early 80s, then it really took off and it became a magnet for other people bringing their stories to it. Now there's so many alleged crash sites that it's like, this story is just crazy now. There's like 6 or 7 official, like, could be this place, or maybe they all happened type spaces. A lot of contradictory stories and a lot of media circus that came to it. And the thing is you really can't trust the government. And they would definitely be up to stuff if they ever got alien technology or something. So yeah, we should all be very skeptical of anything they ever tell us. However, and in my UFOs in America class, that was one of the things we talked about. During the McCarthy Red Scare, some of the only people who were filing Freedom of Information Acts and daring to do anything that all questioned the official line because everyone was so scared of being accused of being a communist or something, were the UFO people. Tell us what's up. But that was like there's an early era of the UFO contactees where it's just so random that it's like, is this a story being workshopped at this point? Here's an interesting one. Crystal Skulls. The Message of the Crystal Skull from Atlantis to the New Age. I wrote an article once about somebody who found a crystal skull on their property in Colorado, and I interviewed everybody involved. And it turned out to be a glass skull from a glassblower who had left it there to mark a property corner. But by the time that glassblower had come out and claimed it, all these people had channeled things through it, and the New Age store nearby had like used it to channel voices from Lemuria and Mu and Atlantis. Dan Aykroyd the actor is super into crystal skulls, and he has a vodka company called Crystal Skull Vodka. Of course, there was that Indiana Jones movie. Are they alien skulls? Did the Mayans have crystal skulls? Dubious provenances of all this stuff. Ruth Montgomery, another book by her. Just have this because of that connection from my childhood. Author of Aliens Among Us. What happens after death? And what happens before life? Life before life. My mom loved this book. She thought this was just true. Actual case histories of astonishing journeys in life. Who knows? I always say I'm an agnostic about reality. What a great cover, though. I love that lettering. That is just incredible. 50 cents. When my oldest daughter was really young, she was swinging on a swing at a playground, and I was pushing the swing, and she was like, I remember everything was red, and then everything was blue. And I stretched, and it seemed like she was describing being born, and I was like, what are you saying? Everything was red, and then everything was blue, and I stretched. She was so young that I was like, maybe. I know it's like you can't technically make memories yet at that age, but I've had muscle memories recovered of really young experiences that I've had. Like one time I was watching this home video that I found from when I was 1 year old, and I was playing with gravel in front of my parents' front porch in Arizona. In suburban Tempe, and picture the Fablemans. I grew up one town over, a little while later. I got this like full body memory watching that of like, I could feel like how it felt to have gravel on my hands and be sitting there and playing that. And like, the body keeps the score. That book title is true. But this is about other stuff. This is about like a life before this life as a cosmic consciousness or a soul in some other form. I'll tell you what, you get enough anecdotes together about anything, and I'm like, I don't know why I kept this. Something about it appealed. That great cover, maybe. I was just like, start a cult for this cover. These were going to be in the mainstream, or what are you calling it? The literary fiction paperback case. But then I was like, I could either put 2 Camus titles in or keep these trash books. I do think the literary fiction collection got a little less interesting when I moved these over to Weird Books. But these are both by this Provo therapist who, Provo, Utah, who she allegedly got a real young woman's diary that tells all about her descent into drug addiction, and then a young boy's diary that tells all about him getting possessed after playing Dungeons and Dragons. These are both insane artifacts. Paul F. Tompkins has a hilarious stand-up special that takes its name from this book, comedy special called Freak Wharf. Because that's what she calls the mental home in it, the Freak Wharf. He jokes that it's like the cops from Dragnet wrote a anti-drug book on their day off. It does feel like that. Jay's journal is interesting. One of the things that proves it's true is that his grave is possessed and glows red and green now. I went to his grave in Provo, Utah, and it is opposite of a traffic signal. So it glows red and green because of the walk signs. That was an easy one to solve. Just go right there. In fact, I find it unlikely that it was put forward in good faith as a real supernatural thing. This always reminds me of camping as a young Boy Scout teenager, and the guy I had built a rock fort with for our Wilderness Survival Merit Badge. He spent half the night completely repeating from memory with the voice an entire Bill Cosby comedy album or 2, and then talking about how he had gotten possessed from Dungeons and Dragons and demons would visit him all the time. So that was like a common thing that people talked about. People would read this and be like, yes, I believe it. Well, that's all that shelf. There's another shelf of weird books coming up. The one down there. And that'll probably be 1 or 2 videos. And then we'll talk about those Carlos Allende annotated books. Well, I hope everyone's doing great. Take care.